Welcome to the program, everybody. I'm Dennis R. Sumlin. You are watching the Core Confidence Life podcast here on Core Confidence Life TV. Be sure you hit the subscribe button on your screen because you do not want to miss any interview, any video, any event happening here at Core Confidence Life. You just don't want to miss it. All right, you can also listen to our audio podcast, and sometimes those shows are different than the ones you see here. So subscribe to us, Core Confidence Life, on Apple or Spotify. You can also ask Alexa to play the Core Confidence Life. Also follow us on Twitter and Facebook, right? And go to our website, coreconfidencelife.com, to look at the other services that we offer. We are a personal development podcast, and we support relationships, pleasure, and prosperity, right? On today's program, we are talking about grief, mourning, loss, and how we move through those things. You know, in the world today, there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of loss, a lot of grief, a lot of sadness, a lot of negativity. How do we move through those things in a healthy, productive manner? How do we not allow our grief to define who we are? How do we mourn and grieve in a way that empowers us instead of keeps us down? On today's program, we're going to be speaking to Marcia Earhart. She is a coach who is specializing in helping people through hard times and loss. And so we're going to get into what grief is, what's the best solutions to move through your grief, what does the other side look like, and how we can create a more positive community. And all that's coming at you right after this. Core Confidence Life.
Has life become an echo chamber? Are you tired of the noise? Does everybody seem to talk in sound bites? You can't get to real dialogue? Perhaps politics is getting you down. It's just too negative. Maybe it's in your business, at your job. People are just talking over each other. Or perhaps it's in your family or other important relationships. Confronting how we label one another and how we deal with our brain's negative processes can free you from these situations, can help you move forward. I'd love to chat with you at 308-227-3221, or try one of my 2 programs regarding politics, 5-Day Talk to Politics Without Anger or Free Challenge, or the Find Your Authentic Political Voice program. Check me out at williamsavanas.com. That's WILLIAMSILVANEUS.com. You can take control.
Welcome to the show. And I am interviewing Marcia Earhart about grief and things like that. And we're going to turn right to Marcia now. Hi, Marcia.
Hey, Dennis. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great and glad to have you on the program.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today.
Sure. So our topic today is grief and loss and how we navigate through those murky emotions. But before we get there, tell us a little bit about who you are in general. Who is Marcia?
Marcia is a wife, a mom. I am a coach. I am a mediator, a very loyal, faithful friend. And I love life, and I love to enjoy life with great passion and purpose.
Ah, all right. That's a good opening, good description there. So, you know, we're talking about grief and loss, and you know, if you look at the world and the state of the world today, there is a lot of loss going on for various different reasons. You got the pandemic, you have social unrest, and it's not just in the United States. It's unfortunately in most of the world is some sort of chaos. And of course, the everyday ups and downs of life and death. So you're here to talk to us about how to navigate through those things in a healthy, productive way. So, what got you into grief? Basically, what good grief? What got you into grief?
Well, and you said good grief, exactly. And I think that we have to look at, we're all going to grieve on this side. We're all going to experience loss. It's part of the life we live in. For us, I lost a son almost 6.5 years ago, our oldest son, Sterling, to a tragic car accident. And out of that was birthed a 501c3 where we actually work with other people who've lost a child, sibling, or grandchild. Unfortunately, in October this past year, our second oldest son was murdered with his girlfriend. And so I think that this has kind of chosen me. Early on in life, Dennis, from the age of birth till 18, I had 17 significant losses, deaths in my life of individuals that I was close to or in community with, and they were tragic. So I feel I have had a great essence of being able to have experience of being around, walking through, and knowing what it looks like, feels like, and the journey and what it needs to kind of have the outcome for. I actually saw people in my earlier years who lost their lives to the loss of a child in their life, and they no longer were able to recover and come back in. And to me, my life is not over yet. There's still purpose to be served. So I'm allowing that pain to be purposed and using it in the manner that I feel called to. So there you go.
Wow. So it chose you. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes the circumstances in our life, but that actually it makes a very effective coach and counselor and so forth. Like if you know what it's like yourself, if you've lived through it, you know all the stages, you're, in my view, better able to relate and console and just be with the person that you're coaching and helping through this.
And I would agree with that. I would say that even for our son, because we have a total of 5 children and we had younger children, and our son at the time of the first loss was 12. And we went to get him into counseling, and it was making him angrier. And the reason he was getting angrier is because he wanted someone who was counseling him that had experienced the kind of loss he was going through. And I think when we go through any kind of experience in our life, it is always, for us, we can relate to that person that's walked the journey we're in. Either if they're just a little before us or if they're even right beside us. There's something about that brings a sense of understanding and that I can do this. And so I think you're right. We do have that ability to walk in someone's life knowing, because we're experiencing it and we're living it out on 2 different realms, from an accident and from a murder end.
Yeah, and that's 2 different kinds of things. They all result in the same thing, but those 2 different kinds of traumas that require maybe similar processes, but there are 2 different events, which brings up 2 different kinds of feelings.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So what are the stages of grief? Because everything has stages, and we go through the initial stage, the shock, and then we kind of move through this however long it takes. So what is the process of grief? There's different stages.
Well, I know Kubler-Ross actually said there were stages of grief, and I have to disagree. I think that for each of us, this grief is linear. It's not linear. So it's all over the place. So what I might feel in my grief process, you may not experience some of those things. We don't have to experience every single one of them. We may not have denial. We may not have anger. We may not have a sense of loneliness. What we may experience is I may stay in a place of isolation. And that may be where I work through my grief. I may stay in a place of anger where I'm not able to because I'm not addressing those things. And even with isolation, any of those things too prolonged, if you don't have the skills and the tools, you're not going to move forward. So when we talk about the stages, what I like to talk about with the stage is that there is shock. And after the shock, we have to come, and the shock literally can last anywhere from months to up to a year. And in that process, we have to learn how to navigate, and we have to be introspective, and we have to be intentional to bring resolve in the loss that we've experienced. So I don't want people to feel like, well, okay, I haven't had an anger stage. I haven't had a crying stage. Some people don't cry. Some people, and when I say this, they may get out and run. They may exercise. That may be their way of releasing their grief. So I want people to have the freedom that it's however you need to process that, but there are appropriate processes, if that makes sense. We don't want people acting out in their grief, hurting other people, because anger can lead you to do some things that are harmful to yourself and to other people. So that's where we want people to understand there is intervention and there are other things that can help them with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely things aren't, because I've been on my little rant lately, not in videos or whatever, but just in the different groups I'm in and just in my own mind. Like, I think the personal growth industry, because it's an industry, a lot of times people go around one size fits all formulas. And that's just not how real people work. Everyone doesn't move through the same thing at the same time, at the same pace. Some people don't feel parts of what's supposed to be the cycle. Some people feel it, some people skip through it. People are all different.
That's right.
And it's important to be mindful of that. And if you're helping someone out, to be flexible with that.
And I agree with that. And I think for so long, and because one of the things that, a lot of people, when they come, initially they'll say, I haven't felt this. And they're feeling like a sense of guilt because they haven't felt something they should have felt. I'm like, whoa, no one said you have to feel that. It's okay. So part of my job is to give people permission to do this journey uniquely the way they were created to do the journey, and to help provide those tools and that hope and that healing in the process. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like that's part of the process. People get frustrated in the process because they're like, well, when is this other stage going to come? When am I going to feel that I'm ready to move on? And it may never come, because that may not be something that really resonates with you in the way that you would process it to begin with.
Yeah. I've had a couple of losses myself. Many years ago, I lost a girlfriend to a car accident. And I've had other losses since then as well. And, I guess the stereotypical thing would happen. You would go into a long, mourning stage, and you'd be hysterical. And it didn't really happen that way for me. And so I can definitely see where somebody else would feel, because they didn't, I guess, go hysterical or go into deep depressions or go on drugs. If they didn't do that, they might feel, well, I skipped a step, or maybe I didn't really care, or whatever. They could self-guilt. And it's not about self-guilting. People move through the process the way that they move through it.
That's right. That's right. And I think, when you were talking about the self-guilt, that is something that, as I said, I see a lot of. And so that's just something else we want to be able to say, that's not something you need to own. But when you were talking about mourning, I want to kind of talk about grief is what's happening internally to us. Mourning is the outward expression of the grief that's going on in us. So for your listeners and people who are watching to understand that when I'm grieving, that is internal. But when I'm mourning, that is the external of how I'm choosing to deal with what's going on in my internal self.
Good definition of words, because I think we use those words interchangeably. I'm mourning silently. Well, if you're mourning silently, maybe that's just grief. So it's good to define these words.
Right.
It's good stuff. So when you help somebody move through the process after a loss, what are the usual things you start with?
The first thing is I will ask the person, kind of tell me a little bit about where you are. And I hear a lot of apologies from the beginning. And I can tell whether the person has actually given themselves permission to grieve or not. And I will say, well, I just want to give you permission to grieve. And Dennis, I can just always see like the physical body just sigh. It lets down because all of a sudden they realize they have permission. So we have to start with permission first. Then we talk about how are you grieving? And each of us, like we talked about, are going to grieve differently. So in the grief, how are you expressing that in the way you're mourning? And if someone says to me, well, I just stay as busy as I possibly can, I'm uncomfortable with that. One of the things for me to try and help them understand is that grief internally is going to come out at some point. So they have to be aware, and being self-aware is extremely important, that if we don't work with those things now, it's going to come later down the road. So I try to start helping them maybe to have scheduled time for grieving. And what does that mean? That means that every day, like from 5 to 6, I schedule a time that I actually go in my room. I may put on, some worship music or just some music where it's cathartic, that I can just have that time to, whether I express it in crying, whether I express it in drawing, but that I am actually becoming in tune with the feelings that are going on internally so that I have a way to express them externally. And to set a timer. And after that timer goes off, that you have an activity to engage in afterwards where there's a positive after that, where you are either doing something that's in memory of the person that you've lost, or you're celebrating something because you've dealt with the situation that you're feeling a sense of loss over. And that's kind of where we begin.
I do want to say, like, we grieve over different things for different reasons. So even if you don't know someone personally, you can still be grieving. Like, I mentioned, I lost a girlfriend to a car accident, and I've lost, a couple of friends and so forth. And that's something to grieve about. But also, even if we as a society lose a well-known person, it's okay to grieve over that person. Like I tend to grieve in silence. So I grieved over Kobe Bryant.
Yes.
So I don't know him. I'm not really that much into sports, but I still grieved, and that's okay. No one can tell you who to grieve more over than someone else. It's just none of these things are written in stone.
No. And we too, as a family, grieved over his loss and have grieved for his family. And it just having had loss in my own life, to have the kind of loss. And I mean, you're talking about a person that loved well, that, I mean, they had such an effect on people in society, and it leaves a vacancy. And anytime any loss in our lives leaves a vacancy. And I think that part of our culture, we are very skittish. I think most people in our culture are very skittish when it comes to talking about what we're talking about today, because they're not comfortable. They've not been given the tools. They've not really been comfortable with themselves, much less comfortable with someone else's grief. So I love that you can verbalize that you've actually grieved and probably still are those things over Kobe Bryant, because they're losses that are ongoing. And that's one of the things we don't get over. We get through loss. We're not going to be over, because for one thing, if it's a person, we don't get over a person. A person has had an impact some way in our life, somehow on our life. And whether it's emotionally, physically, interpersonally, there's an impact. So we're never going to get over that. And you know what? In all honesty, I don't want to get over that. I want to have those memories. I want to be able to remember well. I want to be able to celebrate. I want to hold those things near and dear to my heart. But that's part of the brokenness of this world. So it's finding the beauty in the midst of the broken.
Absolutely correct. And time doesn't matter. Everyone uses, time heals all. Well, you never really forget. Like, I still think about, I have a friend whose son got murdered 17 years ago, and I still think about him. I mean, I don't, fold up and cry, but I still think he's still in my mind.
Sure.
So, you're right. When you with a person, you never really get over whatever is getting over anyway. I don't even know what that means.
No, and so when people say, "Well, people need to get over," I'm like, "What do you want them to get over?" I said, "So, like this person, if they have someone in their life, I'm like, so would you want to get? Do you want to ever get over your mom or your dad, or do you want to? No." I said, "Okay, so when you're saying they need to get over, they're not going to get over. That's cruel. It's harsh. It's mean." I said, because what we need to say is, how can I walk through this with you? How can I remember well someone with you? And so when you're having one of those moments where you're thinking of your friend's son who passed and was killed and murdered, to have someone who can enter in that, that's what as a culture we're called to do, not shy away, not push away. But that's where I feel like we've got to get more comfortable with these kind of conversations on open forums, because everyone in this life is going to lose everything they have eventually. Eventually. And for us to be in denial of that, to me, is one of the worst things that we can do for ourselves individually and as a culture. So what we can do is embrace, and it's not like having a pessimistic attitude of we're all going to lose everything, but to be optimistic in the sense of, you know what, we are going to lose, but we can celebrate and we can cry together. We can rejoice together and do something to celebrate that person, even though we may have a time where we're really in sorrow.
Yeah. And also on this line of grief, talk about the loss of other things. People aren't the only things that we lose.
That's right.
We lose pets, we lose relationships, we lose property. So how does that work? Talk a little bit about maybe if you've coached people through losing property or animals. I mean, animals are more like the member of the family, but maybe property, relationships, things like that.
Well, property is, and I have to say, and this may sound odd, but property can be very similar in the sense of the ownership that someone has because of the memories that they had there, what happened with their life there. So again, it's each person's going to process that differently. So understanding the meaning behind that place. An example would be when you grow up in your house and your parents sell that home. I have had a lot of people who've really struggled with that loss because that was the home they grew up in. There were memories there. There's a sadness and a sorrow because it's no longer. And that's okay. But it's also like a person to them because it holds such significance in their life. So I think and when you moving is a loss. When you move from one place to another. So there's no loss that is less than any other loss. And when I say that, people are like, oh my gosh, are you equating material things with people? No, what I'm saying is that the loss that one is feeling, it's still the significance in their lives that needs to be addressed because it's a loss. And there again, we have to reshape our minds of how we look at that. So when I deal with a client over that, we talk about ways how to incorporate that loss in their life, put it in perspective. What are the good things they'll talk about? Or maybe there were some sad things. Maybe there were some hard things associated with that place. Someone coming out of prison and even though that may sound odd, it's still a loss for someone because it's a transition from one place to another. And it's a fear of, okay, but I was comfortable with that. And I did meet people and we've dealt with people who have had those struggles and it's a loss. So it's moving from one place emotionally to another place emotionally. And we have to have those skills and those tools to do that.
I was powerful what you were saying. People who are leaving jail are grieving. Some people are grieving because they're leaving.
Yes.
Because when you're in prison, you're in prison for a while. You're not in prison overnight. So you've created a comfort zone. You actually do meet people there that you can trust, and et cetera. And everyone's sentence is different. So when you leave, there's that transition. There's that what I'm familiar with into something new. That's very true. And I remember I've grieved over property before myself. I remember when I was a little kid and they got me a new bed. I was upset because they took the old one away.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while before I would even go in my room for the new bed. I get attached to things. So,
But I think, but you're representing all of us. We all get attached, and that's one of the things when we changed over beds to with our kids, we explain the process because there is attachment. It's your comfort zone. It's what you're used to. When we were moving after our, before we moved to where we are, and after our son had passed, we sat down as a family and talked about the move. We talked about the transition. We talked about the need to leave the place that was triggering us and what that was going to look like. We let our kids be involved in the process of this move. They actually picked this house out. They actually had a decision making in the process, which some people may think, well, that's crazy. No, this was affecting their lives. They needed to be involved in the process. They needed to know that it mattered what they thought and how they felt, and to incorporate that within the home that we were going to be living in.
Absolutely. So when you will work with people, is there a particular average time where most people seem to be okay to kind of just continue on? Not that they forget, not that they get over, we talked about that, but what is there an average particular time that when you've worked with people, they seem to be a little bit more in the clear?
I would say ours is unique because of the Sterling Rose Sanctuary. We work with people in the midst of, and sometimes right on the onset of the tragedy, Dennis. So we may be there right soon after that tragedy has happened. We're able to, kind of walk in that journey with them at the beginning. So we see the shock factor. We may have conversations with them throughout the process. And so for each person, I see a difference based on their perspective and the tools that they apply to their lives. The Sterling Rose Sanctuary actually offers, for our thing is for people to come to be at a place where they're removed from the place of triggering, to have a place to reset, to have a place to rest, to have a place to release the pain and to resolve some of those relational issues they may have had with the person or situation, because it could have been a situation, or to reconnect relationally so they can reconnect relationally with other people. And so the Sterling Rose Sanctuary is a 3 to 5 days where it's kind of a gradual process of working through. But on the aftermath, we've kept in touch with, and the people that we've kept in touch with, I would say the majority of them are doing very well in managing their lives, in living in purpose, in being intentional, and being engaged in their community with their family and friends. There are some that we have seen some disassociation where, and that happens, where someone just can't be with any of the people that remind them anymore of the person, so they just leave. And that's why a lot of times, especially when a child passes, you'll see a husband and wife divorce. And we've seen that, and it's grievous. But part of that is because that individual is so steeped in the disassociation in their mind, they cannot even rationally think through, I need to be putting these tools and these resources in place. So I don't think there's a magical time frame. I would say the second year is even harder than the first year, which most people do not know that if they've had a loss of a child, because that first year you really are in the shock. So the second year, the reality comes that they are gone and they are not coming back. And there's a reality that starts coming, and that year is almost more crippling than the first year. And I would say by year 3 and 4, if you're applying those tools and you're doing the things that you need to, then you start seeing where you are navigating life at a better pace and you're able to engage. But as you said, we've got different areas of loss, different things. And right now our culture is, they've lost what the world looked like to them. They've lost what life looked like to them. So we have gone from, I consider we went into a grief pandemic because of COVID. And I believe that COVID has taken us, from the grief pandemic into a fatigue pandemic. We are seeing fatigue, and we're seeing exhaustion, because there's been so much change. People have not known how to deal with all of this because they've not had the ability to process it with someone who can help them.
Yeah. And speaking of processing things, do you have any kinds of tools that can help people who may be watching this right now if they're going through a loss or they're witnessing a loss and it's affecting them? Is there any tools that you can talk about?
Absolutely. There are a couple of them. One of them is, it's called How to Face the Fractures of Grief. And fractures would be an acronym that I created to help people. Because when grieving, we need things to be kind of brief and concise because our minds are muddied, we're overwhelmed, we can't think, it's confusing, we are numb. So the F in that is to face the loss, and meaning that to really look at it, to take and stop and look and recognize there's a loss. And the second one is to release the pain, and not just to hold it in, but to actually do something to release the pain, whether you run, whether you cry, whether you hit a pillow, whether you kickbox, but there needs to be an action associated with releasing that pain. The next one would be to accept your reality. Your reality right now will not necessarily, and when I say your reality, the reality you're feeling right now may not necessarily be the reality, because some people feel so overwhelmed. It's like, and I have to tell you, most people that we talk to that have had sustaining loss, they've thought about suicide. So the feeling you're feeling right now, that's what you're feeling right now. But accept your reality for right now, and be okay that in a little while you've got to accept it again, that this is where I am for now, but I won't stay here forever. But there is a reality that something significant has changed in your life. The next one is to count the treasures. Count the things that are beautiful. Count those things that you hold dear. Don't let the negative, because our propensity is to let the negative overshadow all the beautiful in the midst of the broken. And so we don't want that. The T in fractures is to talk out loud. And yes, talk out loud, even if you're by yourself, because talking out loud makes it become a reality. It makes it real. It helps. It's actually shown that when you talk out loud, that helps your mind and your body to process this all together. And then the next one would be to uproot negative thinking. We allow this negative rhetoric in our head and to stop it. So if you start with that rhetoric talk, stop it, replace it with something positive, because if not, that negative spirit can take on its own in you, and it can really take over all the good that is there. The R is to rest and renew your mind. How do we rest and renew our mind when we're feeling overwhelmed? Well, we do things like deep breathing techniques. We do things that we read, and for people who are spiritual, read the Bible or read things that are comforting, listen to music, create art. That's renewing, that's restful. Then the E is to know that there's an ebb and flow, and be sensitive to yourself and allow yourself to ebb and flow, and not so hard that I thought I had dealt with this and I'm crying today and I don't know where this came from. It's okay. And then the last one is to speak healing over your soul. And I did this every day. My clients, I have them do this in the morning and at night before they go to bed, to literally start speaking to their brain, to their heart, to their ligaments, to their muscles, to their organs, because grief will go into your organs. Your body will keep the score of the pain and the loss that you're experiencing. So it's important that you speak healing over your body, and pray over your body, and pray for renewal, and pray for your mind to be renewed, because it's important. So there's some of the tools that we have given to people, but we also tell people that they need capacity, because what happens in grief is we lose capacity. I think most right now the world has lost capacity. that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on, and
Yes.
it's having such an impact, both the obviously the physical parts of the loss and people who are losing their lives, but also just like you said earlier, the stress and the exhaustion and the uncertainty and the negativity, paranoia, rebellion against lockdown. I mean, we're just going cuckoo.
Yes, we are. And because it's almost, and what I see is like all these people that are acting out, it's almost like a mother hen needs to kind of take them in her arms and just say, hey, baby, come on over here. Because they are acting out. There's grief. And when we are angry and we're grieving and there's loss, the immature aspect of that is to kind of have a temper tantrum. It's like a 2-year-old that has a temper tantrum. And someone just kind of needs to take them in and just say, hey, I understand, but this is not okay. To do what you're doing isn't okay. But I want to love on you and I want to be present with you and I want to walk this journey out with you. But everyone's so hostile, no one's even receptive to that. So
Yeah.
We're in a catch-22.
Well, unfortunately, things around health are going to turn political. So
Yep.
everything turns political.
Yes, it does. But
Yeah.
this is even more reason why we have to find those important things that help us renew our minds, that help us to rest, that really are positive, influential things, not negative. And right now we see there are a lot of people turning to negative displays. There needs to be more positive. We need some good news in the midst of our grief. We need some good news. So we need things that are happening that we can celebrate. And what's happening is more is being created that is causing grief to us. So it's almost like one is propelling the other, and we need a halt and go. We need good things happening in the midst of this.
We definitely do. Do you have any maybe one tip, I guess, to, let's say, for the collective, let's say not just an individual, but for society in general, maybe some people will listen and benefit from it. Maybe there's some dopey politician watching that'll get a good idea to do something positive. For the collective, do you have any one or two suggestions to how to move past this collective pain?
Well, that's a good question. And I think, it started out that we need to, I really do not believe people truly are listening with active listening ears to each other, Dennis. We say we want to listen. We say we want to be heard, but that's a two-way street. Everybody in this culture needs to be quiet and listen, and to talk with a sense of dignity to other people and respect. And if we can start respecting that every person has hurts, they have emotions, they have value, they have a different perspective based on their life experiences, I believe we could actually move in a positive direction in our culture. But everyone wants to dig in their heels and they get angry because you don't understand what I've gone through. I may never understand what you've gone through, but I at least can be present with you right now. Does that make sense to you? We are not being present. We really aren't being present in the pain with other people. We're trying to convince other people of our pain. We're never going to convince other people of our pain, but we can be present. And I think that's where we need to make sure that we understand there's a difference.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely focus too much on differences and
Yes.
not enough on similarities, because I find that usually they tell you you're not supposed to talk about politics and religion, but I do find that when you don't talk about those topics and you just relate to someone as a human, putting aside all this ideology, you'll find a lot more things in common with them than you think you would.
Well, and I think that we're supposed to focus on the bridge building and not the barriers. And unfortunately, And I say this with all due respect, but I believe the media has really pitted us as a culture against each other because they only want to find the barriers. We need to see that there's a lot that bridges us together. We are human beings who are full of love and compassion and need nurturing and need community and need each other. And you and I are no different. We have the same needs at the very core of who we are. Our experiences may be different, but at the end of the day, we're going to laugh, we're going to cry, we're going to experience the same kinds of emotions. So if we as a culture could start looking at that and understanding, hey, you're a son, you're a mom, you're a dad, these are individuals. These are not just someone whose life can be erased. And I just, and we can't cancel this cancel culture. Why are we trying to cancel each other? That to me takes away from the purpose of our lives. We need to say, hey, you matter. And I'm sorry, I don't want to cancel somebody. I just don't. I love people way too much. I want people to know their value to me. And I think if other people could start living that way, then we would see a change in the world instead of everyone digging their heels in and wanting it just their way. We have to learn what it means to walk with integrity and walk with compassion once again. I feel like many have forgotten.
That's beautiful. And I agree with you that we definitely focus. We have a negative bias going on, and the media feeds it. And I wish there was a way. I mean, the media is going to do what it does. I know people get upset about what the media does, but the media is going to do what it's designed to do. Unfortunately, if it bleeds, it leads. And the media is a business, so they're going to do what makes them money. And so I don't get upset at what the media does because I have an understanding that we have a negative bias, and what bleeds is going to lead, and the media is a business. Right. So I do wish that they would focus on more things that we had in common and bring us all together. But I think the media will change when we change. I think that if we stop turning on the TV for
Right.
the bad news, turning it off for the good news,
That's
I think
right.
I think if we start ourselves communicating on a more soul level, and more people related to that, then the media would have no choice but to change, because then what sells will change.
I agree with you 100%. And honestly, I mean, it may sound ignorant, but I do not turn on my news. I have not had the TV on probably since March. I've not turned it on. I will not watch it because I will choose to focus on the things that are bridging to me with other people in this world than the things that are to pull us apart. We are here for a brief time. I do not want my time being spent arguing, divisive. I want to be a bridge builder. I want to be one to make a change and a difference. And I think we have to choose which side we're going to be on, and we need to walk it out with integrity and with effort and intentionality.
That's beautiful. I agree with you. And, I'm not perfect myself.
Well, none of us are,
everyone's got their
Dennis.
little buzz issues. I'm not perfect. I'm pretty ideological in some areas. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to get there.
Well, I mean, by the grace of God, ergo I. I mean, that's really it. I mean, and I think I loved your analogy of turning on the TV, or turning off the TV from the negative and putting in the positive. And that is such a great analogy for grief, because we have to turn off the negative. We have to turn on the positive, even in the midst of profound loss. I love that you had that, because it's a beautiful analogy that goes right over to loss and grief. Not that we negate that it's happening, but the fact that we have an intentional decision to make in the process of how we do that.
Absolutely. So how can people find out more about what you do, and what you offer?
Well, I have a website. It's www.thesterlingrosesanctuary.us. And so they can look on that. And then we have a phone number, 239-571-6662. They can call there. And we are a 501c3, so we are a free resource for people. And during this time, we opened up in March because of COVID to all people who were struggling with loss to be able to get our resources and use us and have access, because people need it. And we want to be present in the midst of their pain and give them some ability to have tools to walk through with victory. We all need some victory. And so that's what we want to offer, is some hope and healing in the midst of their time of grief and loss.
Definitely. Thank you very much. You're doing great work out there. And just thank you for contributing to healing instead of hell. So.
Well, and I think more people, if we could just join hands and say, we want to be part of the healing, not part of the hurt. There's so much hurt, Dennis, and we've talked about all of that. So I love that we can come together and we can bring hope and healing in the midst of, and help people know that there is beauty in the broken, and they need to focus on the beauty. And yes, there are things that are broken and need to be fixed, but there's always going to be stuff that's broken. So we can either be hyper vigilant over the broken, or we can actually be hyper vigilant on the beauty. And in all honesty, I want the broken to be fixed, so I will be an advocate in the places and do the things I can to fix that. But I really want to be able to enjoy and experience the beauty of this life, because we don't know what this afternoon holds, and we don't know what tomorrow holds. So I think all of us have to question what do we want our life to count for? What do we want in the midst of grief and loss? How do we want this to define? Do we want it to define us? I didn't want the loss of my sons to define me. I wanted it to redefine how I live and how I love.
Beautiful. All right. Well, that's a good note to thank you for coming on the program and sharing your expertise and your insight with us.
Well, I'm so thankful to have been able to be here today with you. And I appreciate you sharing about your losses and just being so open and transparent, because that's what it takes in this life, is to be engaging with other people where they can relate, is that we have to be relatable. So thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
If you'd like to be a guest on the Core Confidence Life podcast, just fill out our application by going to coreconfidencelife.com/guest. That's coreconfidencelife.com/guest. We appreciate you and all your feedback. So to give us comments about the podcast or anything else, just send a message to Dennis at coreconfidencelife.com. That's Dennis at coreconfidencelife.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and all the social media outlets, of course, at Core Confidence Life. I'm your host, Dennis, from New York City, giving you higher consciousness, lower stress, hard-hitting manhood issues with just a side of cornball humor.